There's really nothing better than the occasional weekend getaway to rejuvenate your body and mind, especially when you or me as a photographer gets to go to a place where the opportunities to make great pictures are abundant. It's a really great feeling to take in a site, a new, exciting site, and know that great work is going to be made, before you even press the shutter button. This is a big reason why I do photography myself. The feeling of being so locked into a moment and an environment and be able to immortalize those moments with the click of a button, it really speaks to me. But what happens when the universe deals you a less than desirable hand and you have to deal with a situation that isn't great for making great pictures? How do you manage your expectations and make the most of a poor situation? A few weeks ago, Taylor and I took a trip up to Newport, Rhode Island for a weekend vacation. It's a lovely coastal New England city with a lot to offer, especially for someone who likes photography. But to our dismay, the forecast leading up to the trip each day looked worse and worse. And it rained. It rained a lot. But we didn't let that stop us from having a good time and enjoying our trip. I worried a lot about my camera gear getting wet while I was there, but we made it happen. So this video is kind of like a hybrid of things, general sentiments about the trip and some tips to help you maybe make the most of a bad situation when you're traveling as a photographer, and maybe you can learn from some of the mistakes that I made. Let's get right to it and talk about gear with tip number 1. Bring only gear that matters. I always have this internal debate about what cameras and gear that I'm gonna bring when I go on a trip, even when I just go out for the day shooting. Ideally, I would bring as much high quality gear as I could to capture the highest quality photos that I could. I want to make the most of the few travel opportunities that I get. They don't come around often. I work a full-time job. I'm sure you work a full-time job, and you don't get to just leave that job and travel whenever you want. And I got really wrapped up with this idea on my last trip when I went to Portland, Maine in the summer of 2020, abiding by COVID regulations, of course. But during that trip, I became kind of obsessed with capturing the best images that I could, and it kind of ruined the trip for me in a way. I lugged around my digital kit and my Bronica ETRS, and I wound up feeling frustrated a lot of times, bringing, a lot of camera gear and not capturing, frame perfect photos that I would put in a book at every corner. This time around, I knew better. I left the medium format camera at home and I stuck to one film format, and I brought along my Sony RX100 III for video B-roll and the couple digital snapshots that I wanted to take. I brought my Minolta XK with 3 lenses. I had the 45mm f2, the 24mm f2.8, and the 35-70 f3.5 zoom/macro lens. I also brought my Olympus stylus zoom for snapshots when we were walking around the city. My initial thought was I could keep the Sony in a pocket alongside with the Olympus stylus when we were just walking around, and I could keep the Minolta in a backpack and pull it out for when the appropriate opportunity arose. And that worked out almost perfectly. A medium format camera would not have been worth the trouble in the rain. It would have been an absolute nightmare trying to quickly line up shots and get it in and out of my bag as fast as I could. At least with the XK, I could pull it out quickly, take a shot, let the camera do a lot of the work, and put it back, and I wouldn't have to worry. But despite this small kit, I think I could have cut it down even more. It would have been no issue to leave the Sony behind, as well as the 45mm f2 for my Minolta camera. I wound up filming all my B-roll on my iPhone, and although I love the 45 and I think it's a great lens, Having the 35 to 70 zoom lens, which is a really sharp and useful lens, meant that I never took it off the camera if I didn't have to. Cutting down on unnecessary gear lightens the mental and physical load of your camera kit, and it gives you the opportunity to use the small amount of gear that you have to its highest potential because you are focused on only using that gear. The mental part of that, the mental weight, is really important when the weather is really nasty. Some of that extra bandwidth gets taken up by how the weather affects your shooting. Do you need to take extra steps to protect your gear? How quickly can you get your camera in and out of your bag? How quickly can you focus and take the shot? There's also metering to take into consideration because when you have to shoot with really dense cloud cover and really gray skies, it's different than when you're shooting in really bright sunlight. That extra space in your brain just makes things more enjoyable. And gear doesn't stop at cameras either. Your clothes and your bag makes a difference. The first stop was at Beavertail Lighthouse. It was one of 2 lighthouses that we would visit on the trip. When we arrived, we were met with wind whipping cold rain in our faces from every direction. And despite that, I did manage to get this one photo of a man fishing out on the rocks. But already it was very clear that we were underprepared, which brings me to my very obvious tip number 2. Be prepared. I know, duh, nothing groundbreaking, no, magic, this is gonna make your trip, all of a sudden perfect. But despite knowing that myself, I was still underprepared. I actually had to stop at REI to pick up a new rain jacket because the jacket that I had just wasn't cutting it. I was like damp and cold for an entire day and it was totally miserable. So when you are preparing to go out into the rain, make sure your jacket is actually waterproof and not kind of waterproof. There is a huge difference and it will make things so much better when you are prepared with a proper rain jacket in the rain. The following days after I bought the jacket, I was warmer and drier and it was so much nicer. I brought this along as well and I'm glad I did. It's a waterproof bag. I wound up using it as a carrying case for my camera when I wanted to access it quickly. If you know you're going to be out for an extended period of time and it's going to be raining, make sure that your clothes, your jacket, your shoes, everything is fully waterproof, actually waterproof, not just water resistant or kind of waterproof, and that you layer appropriately to keep warm. You'll be glad you spent a little bit more money on higher performing, more functional garments on these days, I promise you. Thankfully, the rain wound up holding up on the afternoon that I got my new jacket, and that gave us an opportunity to enjoy a little bit of our vacation without worrying about the rain. The next day of the trip proved to be the worst weather-wise and really squashed any opportunities to be outside. A full day taken out of a relatively short trip previously would have been a really huge bummer to me. But in the time since my last trip to Portland, I've been looking for ways to enjoy these trips without being obsessed with photography and taking photos. Which brings me to tip number 3. Find alternate ways to engage with making art while you travel. Knowing that a full day of rain was coming, Taylor and I planned to spend some time at the Newport Art Museum. And as luck would have it, they were doing an exhibition on the work of Donna Ferrato. Donna Ferrato is a photographer that did a long-standing body of reportage photography on domestic abuse and battered women. The images shown in the exhibition were from 2 of her projects, Living with the Enemy and I Am Unbeatable. To describe her work as powerful would be a vast understatement. It literally brought Taylor to tears. She often photographed women with injuries sustained from their abusers or women living with their abusers. It was one of the first times since doing photography myself that I viewed work and got a real deep emotional response to someone else's work. These images are seared into my brain, and I think part of that was viewing it in the style of a gallery and not in a book. I can't recommend her work enough. It's really powerful, wonderful stuff. And I can't recommend seeking out places like art museums enough when you travel as well. They might offer some experience that you can't get anywhere else. And it doesn't end at photography either. The museum had some really wonderful pieces of art that weren't photographs that I really enjoyed seeing. For me personally, the way that I engage with my creative side that isn't photography is through journaling. These are some of the journals that I like to use. They're pretty plain, simple, just lined paper. And yeah, whenever I get a chance, I jot down some notes about what we did that day, the food we ate, places we went, and I find it to be a really fulfilling experience. There's actual research that backs up that when you write things down, you tend to remember them better. So I personally find it a great way to revisit what happened during a trip and to kind of remember and engrave the experience into my brain by writing them down. This journal in particular, I've been using since the beginning of the year. I actually write down a note about every single roll of film that I shoot. Every roll gets its own page, and I write down the camera that I used, the film stock, and some of the things about what I was doing when I was shooting them. Again, you know, where did I go? What did I eat? Who was I with? And just general notes about the photographic experience. If I had a shot that I remember being really good, or if I missed a shot, I write it down in the journal. And it's really nice to do in the field as well. For me, it provides a brief moment to stop and take in the experience and enjoy being engrossed in making pictures. My final film roll journal entry was on the last day of our trip when we took the morning to explore Castle Hill Lighthouse. I loaded up and shot an entire roll of T-Max 100 with a deep yellow filter. The conditions were still pretty poor, but the rain had stopped, so it was an enjoyable morning to take pictures. And we had a really great time, even though the weather sucked. And I think you can have a good time on a trip when the weather sucks too. I hope some of these tips were helpful, and I hope this video was enjoyable to watch. And I gotta say thanks so much for your time, and thank you for, you know, making it this far. So yeah, I'll see you next time. Later, bye.